Hello and welcome to Reportage. This is Danish bin Nabi. Author Jigs Ashar is back with his third book, which is a political thriller titled The Cabinet Conspiracy, which is published by Shristi Books. Let's learn about this book more from the author. Jigs, can you explain this political thriller for the audience first? Let's start from the basic. What is this book all about?
So the book, Danish, as you rightly said, is a political thriller. It is set in contemporary times. So a large part of the book is based in India. So if you look at the current politics of India, right, or the current developmental stage of India on the world stage, it captures it quite topically, I can say. It also covers international geopolitics. So, say for example, India's equations with China and Russia, etc., are also captured as per current times. So, the book is about an insider or a traitor who's in the Indian Prime Minister's cabinet. Okay, and hence the name Cabinet Conspiracy. And throughout the book, this insider is referred to as the serpent. And the serpent, with help from China, right, plots a dual strike on India. So that's where the real events blended with the fiction that I wanted to weave. And the dual strike is one, assassination of the Indian Prime Minister, right? And the second is a terror attack at a Mumbai marathon event where some 60,000 runners participate annually, right? And then, of course, there is an international assassin that is hired to carry out these two strikes. And there is an anti terrorism squad officer who, along with his colleague, are planning to stop the ruthless killer from executing her mission. So, that in brief is what the story is about, Danish.
Is there any character inspired by any real life politician in this thriller?
So, Danish, because the book is why it is unique is it blends in a lot of real events into a fictional story, right? And as I mentioned, because it is set in contemporary times, right? So there is India just a few months before general elections, right? There is a very strong prime minister in the book who stands up against China, right? And China's policies of the BRI and the debt trap, where there is beneath China's economic development through the BRI, there is a very sinister angle to it, which affects poorer nations, right? So, because all these are very real events, right, and it's set in current times, surely some characters you will find are inspired by or resemble current politicians, right, and current world figures. For example, I would say even Prime Minister Mahendra Doshi, who's the one of the protagonists in my book, does have some resemblance with Shri Narendra Modi, right? Because so partly it was not to sensationalize anything, but because I'm setting the book in current times, because the PM is who he is in the book, it couldn't be very different from what the reality is. Otherwise, the readers will in a way not be able to relate to the characters, right? So yes, in that sense, some Chinese characters, Chinese politicians, a lot of Indian politicians are real.
If we see many of the new generation, rather majority of the new generation, isn't interested in politics at all. Do you think books like these, which are the thriller, just like a movie, help in understanding the geopolitics or the regional politics for the new generation?
So one thing, Danish, I've been very careful about is while it's a political thriller, um, the real plot and most of the book is centered around the assassination plot of the Indian Prime Minister, right? And how whether it is carried out or it is foiled is I leave it to the readers to read the book. But I have been very careful when I was writing that uh, because there are real events and there is a lot of research that has gone into writing the book, it does not get into some kind of a editorial in a newspaper, or it doesn't get into something like a documentary or a docu-series, something, an article on politics that the readers are reading, right? So I've kept the real facts about the politics or the BRI or India-China equations to the bare minimum, right, as to what was required to take the story forward. So essentially, I would say there is not too much detailing or in-depth analysis of the politics of today, but it's mainly just a backdrop. Politics is just a background, and politicians are just characters around which a thrilling story is woven.
But this book would give a brief outline, a sort of a blueprint for the new generation if they want to understand the regional politics,
Certainly,
especially the relations with China.
certainly, certainly, they will do that, and also with the Belt and Road Initiative, right, or the BRI as it is called, or the Silk Route, One Belt, One Road. There are many names, but the BRI is very real. Um, if and when executed to its full ambition, will make China an undisputed superpower for decades to come. And as we speak, Danish, and I'm sure you are aware of that, around 149 countries are participating in the BRI, right? So, without making it sound boring for the readers, I have ensured that the pace is maintained. At the same time, adequate information is given to the reader to understand what the BRI is and how the plot takes off from there.
Let's let's transgress a bit from the book. You, as
Sure.
you mentioned, that over 130 countries are part of this BRI. Do you think that we as Indians also should be part of this BRI?
Well, I personally strongly think we should not. Okay. And that is what in real life Mr. Modi has said that we will not be a part of the BRI. And so does Mahendra Doshi, the fictional prime minister in my book, also refuses, right? And that's where the plot takes over because China wants to get rid of a prime minister who doesn't sign the BRI, right? And that's how the assassination plot takes off. But I personally feel that under the guise of infrastructure development, etc. Right? So BRI for our listeners and viewers who are probably not aware of it, it's just a global scale. China is building highways, railways, seaways, right, and the required infrastructure connecting multiple countries with China, right. So the overall objective of the BRI, the ostensible objective, is to facilitate trade, which in a way these things when developed will serve. But what happens is when you look at poorer countries, right? Like there are countries in Africa, there is Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and they've actually fallen prey to the BRI who can't afford this. So China gives them a loan for a few years, etc. Right? Knowing fully aware that the country is not going to be able to repay the loan, right? And when that happens, then China takes over strategic parts of that country, right? So it's taken over major parts of Africa. They would take over some ports, not annex it as a colony, but take it on a 100-year, 500-year lease, which is as good as it's their strategic asset. So
They
they've done
cannot,
this with
but they cannot take our strategic ports or
they
our
can't.
strategic areas. So
Correct.
why
So
not be part
personally,
of it so that we reach Central Asia in less time if then we taking this Java or Iran route?
so one thing is, Danish, that without China intervening and doing these developments for India, I think India today is fully capable of developing these not only infra but relations with other countries on its own. And
But time
importantly,
is of
the
essence. If we take longer
agree.
routes, yeah.
But importantly, Danish, the main point of contention why India is not signing is right that between China and Pakistan, there is something called a CPEC, which is China Pakistan Economic Corridor. And that passes through Pakistan occupied Kashmir. So the Kashmir issue, right, is so intricately linked. So India's first condition with China is that the CPEC cannot pass through POK, and China refuses to acknowledge that as an issue, right? So there they are clearly siding with Pakistan. So that is clearly an issue which is so integral to our national interests that
I
India
com-
should not sign.
I completely get and understand your point, but hypothetically speaking, say for example, if India says we will be part of BRI, what are the likely areas through which we can take part in this road project?
See, see clearly
If
if you
we
look
leave
at
Kashmir out of this equation.
so if Kashmir is, let's say the POK issue is resolved, for argument's sake, hypothetically, right? Then India, if you see, is so strategically located because there are three large seas or oceans across our west, east, and south, right? And hence, if the connectivity from India to say parts of Africa or even South Africa or upwards towards Asia, Central Asia, it can be. I think it's a great. Locationally, it's great. Strategically, if just imagine if two superpowers currently, India and China, do join hands, right? And say, for example, jointly do some development around the BRI. I mean, these two can be colossal giants for like eons to come, right? So sure, there are economic benefits, but other things have to be resolved first, I would say.
Jigs, coming to my next question, to my next point, why
Sure.
aren't differences between China and India getting resolved? Because as you rightly said, as you rightly put, that they are two big economic giants, and we can do wonders if the conflict, if our stressful relations can be resolved. What is the major hiccups?
See, I think there are multiple layers and dimensions to the relations between India and China, right? And it's not only uh, bipolar, right? It's not only between India and China. Because there are equations with other countries which also have to be, as a part of international relations, have to be maintained and resolved. That you don't want to be seen as siding with someone or being an ally with someone, right? Because at the slightest opportunity, if you see, China will always be very aggressive and support someone who's voicing something against India. Take the recent example of Maldives, right? There was we all know the Lakshadweep and the Maldives, and some Maldives ministers made some statements, and India said, okay, no tourism, etc., or discourage tourism. And clearly, China jumped in, right? That we will support you to Maldives, right? So clearly, these are triggers which keep happening, but they are certainly not helping the India-China relations, right? So trade is clearly one dimension, right, where both the countries are not only competing but also complementing in some areas, right? Uh, but politically, right, there are border issues, right? So if you look at the Galwan border, or if you look at Arunachal Pradesh, recently I read that China has kind of renamed some areas and some parts of Arunachal Pradesh as Chinese, right? So there are clearly border issues which are there. There are clearly uh, countries with which China is siding, who are clearly, at I wouldn't say at war, but are against, or at least the ideologies, etc., don't match with what India is, right? For example, Pakistan, right? I mean, there are multiple dimensions at which there are strains in the relationship which need to get resolved.
If we look India's relation with China through prism of Pakistan, I think India is at the loser's end. Whatever their relationship is between China and Pakistan, keeping that aside, can't we somehow have good relations with China, even if it's only for the trade only?
See, so see, there is no trade embargo, etc., between India and China, right? So
Absolutely.
still, right?
Going
There
on.
are, I mean, correct. So I personally visited China. I was in Beijing on projects on work. There are a lot of friends I have who do flourishing business with China, right? So I don't think that has in a way stopped, right? So I mean, I would say just from a trade, etc. point of view, if even if you keep the Pakistan issue aside, then there is, of course, we have to take care of the US China a standoff which
Tussle.
is there, right? And
Yeah.
how it impacts the India-US relations because US is also a great trading partner with India, right? So multiple reasons, but yeah, trade can it be enhanced? It can be, but is India really suffering because of the current India-China relation? I don't think so. I mean, we are doing pretty well, one of the best performing countries in the world today. So yeah, can be
Jigs,
better, but
I understand.
sure.
A lot of research has gone into writing this political thriller. And I'm
Right.
absolutely sure about it that you have read a lot and researched a lot about Pakistan China relations. Explain it for the viewers how this relation cemented over the years, how close they are, apart from their trade, their security establishment, on people's contact, how close basically these relations are, and who was basically a fundamental pivot because of which these relations developed.
See, if you look at the current state of Pakistan, right? Um, be it economically, right? And primarily it is, and I have worked with and I continue to work with a lot of Pakistani colleagues because I consult with the World Bank, right? Lovely people, great to work with. And at a personal level, right? And I'm one of the few Indians who's actually visited Karachi. If you remember, there was earlier cricket visa, right? So I was there for 4 5 days to see a match. Absolutely wonderful people, right? So one thing is that at a personal level, right, there are no issues. Now, if I look at Pakistan and China, China has always been a very sometimes passively aggressive with a lot of countries and very opportunistic, right? So well, as India, maybe I could view China as opportunistic, but if I use a very objective lens, then there is a certain vision as well, right? That China has, and Pakistan, of course, forms, if not a very integral, but it's an important part of their vision, right, for global economic dominance, right? Now, when China sees that there are forget the India Pakistan border issues, etc., or the Kashmir issue, etc., right? But if I just look at Pakistan economically, uh, it has always needed help for whatever reason, right? Um, I wouldn't go to the extent of calling it a failed state, but it does need a lot of help and support from other countries, and that's where China kind of hovers in and goes in, right? And if you look at the Gwadar port, right, again, fell prey to the BRI. The ultimate prize that China is looking at is Karachi, right? As a part of the BRI. And can it have a strategic presence in Karachi? So clearly for China, Pakistan itself is not a big market, right? It's a decent sized market, but not a huge market. But it's a very important gateway to the rest of Asia if you go westwards from Pakistan, right? So yes, a slightly longer route because India is not participating, but a great ally to have if they want to economically expand towards that. So I think it's a marriage of convenience, economic convenience as I see it, um, but not very strategic from a give and take point of view. China is just take and take, right? To give very little to Pakistan is how I see it in a very simplistic manner.
Who was the man behind, or what were the circumstances which brought these two countries very close to each other?
See, I think the genesis, according to me, and I'm not a politics student, so pardon me if I'm reading it incorrectly, but I think with the dual wars that India had with these two countries, right, which was decades earlier, right, is something which has brought them closer, right? जैसे वो हिंदी में बोलते हैं ना कि दुश्मन का दुश्मन दोस्त होता है, something like that. So that is, I think the genesis of it all started at that time. At that time, of course, decades ago, economically, um, India was not as strong as we are today, and Pakistan was not as weak as it is today, right? And China was kind of growing. It was not. It had a few decades of growth after it changed the policies, right? The overall structurally जो उन्होंने change किया, only after that it saw superlative growth in their economics, right? So I think it all started probably in the 1960s or early 1970s. And then, of course, the vision of the Belt and Road Initiative, which is Xi Jinping, which was, of course, envisioned much earlier in the early 2000s, but the execution started in 2013. Is I think those are some seminal years
When this
in which have marked.
relationship is basically cemented.
That's right.
Jigs, coming back to this book, your book, tell me what is your targeted readership for this book?
So my target readership for this is on a lighter note, anybody who reads, right? But clearly, someone who enjoys reading thrillers, I would say, right? Broadly. So it's not that having a political acumen or political interest or understanding the current geopolitics, they are not prerequisites to reading and enjoying the book, right? Because I have tried to explain the background, etc., in a very simple language in the book. Because ultimately, I was trying to craft an entertaining thriller with politics as the background, right? So I would say anybody who loves reading good thrillers, and dare I say, at the expense of sounding a little immodest, that it's fairly international in its approach and the way it is written. So I think anybody who enjoys that will like the book.
Jigs, before we wind up this interesting discussion, my last question to you: what's your
Sure.
next project? Are you working on another political thriller, autobiography, biography? What's your next project?
So one, Danish, I have three books in the pipeline. Cabinet Conspiracy is my third book after Insomnia and A Brutal Hand.
Absolutely.
And and my next book will be a true crime thriller, which is set in around the time of the Second World War in Madras, right? And
In Madras,
that's the
yeah.
reason I put Madras and not Chennai. So Madras was one of the few countries which participated in the Second World War from India, right? And it was impacted. So it is set in those times, and the book is titled "The Headless Victim." And the USP of the book is that it was the first time in India where a murder investigation was solved using forensic science. It was the first time it was used in India. So that's the next book. After that, there's another true crime, which is based on the dreaded gangster Akku Yadav in Nagpur. And the third book, which is in the pipeline, is again something like the Cabinet Conspiracy, which blends real events with fiction. It actually exposes the underbelly, the dark underbelly of banking, uh, and how it has a nexus with terrorism, and it's called the Boardroom Mafia.
And Jigs, I do hope that we will have all the three discussions for my show.
I
Thank
certainly hope
you.
so too, Danish.
Thank you so much
Thank you
for
so
talking to
much.
me. Let me hold your book once again so that it reaches maximum readers, and I do hope people buy and read your book. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you,
that will sit
Jigs.
down.
Pleasure
Thank you,
talking to you.
Danish.
Thank you, sir.
Such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Please subscribe to our channel Reportage and press the bell icon to remain updated.